Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome to Leap of Faith, the program where we speak with people about their spiritual journeys so we can gain insight and inspiration on our own spiritual journey. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Do you remember a point in time in which you didn't believe in God? Perhaps you're struggling with that very thing right now. Some of us have always intuitively believed in some form of God, but most of us struggle with this question. For many of us, the moment of truth comes when we finally realize that there has to be something greater and more powerful than us out there. For others, the compelling factor is the scientific proof that whatever else we may believe about the world we live in, it's undeniable that the world and even the universe could not have developed into what it is, what they are, by accident. You may not like the idea of organized religion or the concept of God as organized religion has presented him, but one thing is for certain. This world was created with intelligent design. Today on Leap of Faith, I'm speaking with Chaya Parkov, whose moment of truth came when she was challenged by a friend to stop a wave in the ocean. Chaya is a licensed clinical social worker, life coach, motivational speaker, Jewish educator, marathon walker, and most recently, a kidney donor. Jewish from birth, Chaya's story is one of those beautiful, slow and steady journeys that's marked by hundreds of what I like to call God moments. Unfortunately, that means that we really ran out of time before we had the chance to discuss so many of the really important things that happened in Chaya's life. What didn't make it into this episode was a beautiful discussion about what happens when a husband and wife aren't on the same page spiritually. What it was like for her to finally get to name a child after the father who she never knew because he died when she was a baby. We didn't get to talk about her participation in marathons or, something that's very near and dear to me, her decision to donate a kidney to a complete stranger. There was so much that was left unsaid that I'm really thinking of bringing Chaya back for a part 2. But for now, we'll have to make do with part 1. So when we come back from the break, we'll hear Chaya's fascinating and inspirational story. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Joining me is my very special guest, Chaya Parkov. Chaya is a licensed clinical social worker, life coach, motivational speaker, Jewish educator, marathon runner, and most recently, a kidney donor. Whew. I'm honestly not sure how she has the energy for all of that. But today, Chaya is going to be sharing with us her very inspirational journey to Torah with us. I'm just so excited to be able to welcome Chaya to the show. Chaya, welcome to Leap of Faith.
Thank you so much, Penina. It's really, really, really nice to be here.
I am so excited, and I know my listeners are just in for a really amazing time. So listen, Chaya, I always like to start our conversations off at the very beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
Okay, well, let's see. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And usually when I talk about my story, most significant was that my father died when I was a baby.
Oh,
I was 6 months old. My mother was 24 with a 4-year-old and a 6-month-old. And my father was 28. So
wow.
that really was a very significant start to my life. We grew up, I call it bagels and lox Jewish.
Ah,
Everybody in my area was either, Jewish or Roman Catholic. And for all intents and purposes, it was pretty much the same thing. We were very family oriented, very food oriented, and not a whole lot of religiosity, but certainly culture.
hmm.
And yeah, so that was I actually went to a day school, believe it or not,
Okay, so like
growing up.
Orthodox.
Yeah, it was a kind of quasi Kiev school, but it was, back way, 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 way back. And I wouldn't necessarily say it wasn't my experience that it wasn't done so well, but it was my
Right.
sister's experience that it wasn't done so well.
Okay.
And I went there from kindergarten until through third grade. And
Okay.
my sister went through the sixth grade. And then apparently we protested. I kind of remember that protesting to my mother and stepfather. My mother remarried when I was 4
Okay.
and saying we wanted to go to public school. And so we did. And so we started public school.
Was that,
Uh,
could you attribute that to the fact that there was like a cognitive dissonance between what you were hearing and learning in school and what was going on in your home? Because I know that was the case for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was I don't really remember a whole lot of that. That's really my sister when she tells that story. She's a few years older than me. That
Mhm.
was her experience, was what we were doing at home and they were teaching in school. There was that cognitive dissonance, and the kids that we hung out with in the neighborhood were not the kids from school,
Right.
and so it seemed like, it just being in public school seemed, more where we belonged. I should say, though, that I still remember my second grade, Mora Chaya. And I wasn't Chaya then. I mean, my Jewish name is Chaya, but I went by my English name until about 7 years ago. And
Okay.
now it's legal. It's legal. It's on my passport, my learner's
Oh.
license. Yeah. But I remember that. So I remember good experiences
Mm.
from there, but we did go to public school. But it's interesting. I remember in the fourth grade when I was in public school, I was not put in the gifted class because they didn't know what I was like coming from a private school, what I was capable of doing. And so the way they did classes back then was, and everyone knew what the classes were, right? They were the 2 gifted classes, and then like it kind of went down, 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 down.
Right.
And it's like crazy when you think about it. So I was in the not gifted class, and one of my good friends, I became very good friends with a girl, and her family was, I guess they were conservative. They kept kosher in the home. They did go to a synagogue. We didn't go to a synagogue, just for Yisker on Yom Kippur. And I craved some of that.
Mm.
I remember I wanted to go to, I guess it was like some kind of Shabbaton or something that her family was going on. And I asked my parents if I could go, and for money reasons or whatever, I didn't go, but I wanted to go to Hebrew school because she went to Hebrew school. So I went for a little while. So there was this craving that I had early on that left for a little while and then eventually came back, thank God. Public school was not easy for me. I was chubby as a kid. I was bullied. If it were today, I honestly don't know if I would have been able to endure what
Mm.
some of the things that I went through. Girls can be really, really mean,
Yes, they
and
can.
they made fun. One particular girl kind of ringleadered, being against me, and you can't be. And they actually stole my friend and said she could be in the skinny committee, and I couldn't. And
Uh,
it was very, very challenging. I was sensitive. Don't be so sensitive, I would be told by the adults. And it's kind of like saying, don't have brown eyes.
right.
It's just, I'm sensitive. And you know what? I'm glad I am. I'm really
Yeah.
glad I'm sensitive.
But
No, it's played a big role in my life. And I think is the reason why I've been able to do some of the things I've done and
hmm.
experience what I've experienced. So so I was in public school, and eventually in fifth grade to get put in the intellectually gifted children, the IGC classes.
Great.
Thank God, thank God, thank God. I'm so grateful that I found my voice literally in the 5th grade. I joined the Glee Club, and a friend of mine who played piano she and I were singing once. She was playing piano and I was singing at her house, and we decided that we would try out for the talent show that there was going to be in the school. And the music teacher, who was a teacher, but she was also the music and drama teacher, she saw that I had a voice, and so encouraged me to sing a different song, because that's the song that we had picked was something that the Glee Club was going to do. And that voice really saved my life, my singing voice. And I was able to be part of the committee that wrote the backstory for the talent show. It was like a Bob Hope kind of theme, where people were coming like a USO, and we were doing performances. And so I was able to perform in that. And then in the 6th grade, we actually wrote an original play. The teacher's parents, interestingly enough, owned a costume factory. And so we actually wrote a play about our 6th grade going to visit the costume factory, and 2 kids getting locked in, kind of staying behind and locked in. And then in the middle, once everybody left and the doors were closed and the costume factory was closed, the mannequins came to life, and they were through the decades. And 1980 was the future.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy. That dates it.
That was 40 years ago.
Yeah, 40 years ago.
Feeling old when we say these things. Yeah.
Right? It's funny when I think about it, but it really was such a gift to me, because it was where I really had purpose, and I was part of the committee that wrote the play, and then I ended up having many parts in the play. I actually inherited a couple of parts because some of the girls were so mean to me when we were getting signed, and I wasn't even that heavy. I was not heavy,
Yeah.
but they really capitalized on that sensitive spot, because that was just inherited in my family, this focus on being very, being thin. And so they actually lost their parts because they teased me on the day we were getting measured for costumes. And so I ended up inheriting some other parts. Yeah, it was a very interesting experience, but that really gave me meaning and purpose. And that carried me through high school, where I was very involved in. Anybody that grew up in Brooklyn knows about Sing, which was it was inter-class and then inter-school competitive plays. So we would write original plays, use tunes from songs and write lyrics, and we would compete within the school. The sophomores, juniors, seniors would compete, and then those winners would compete with other schools. It was a big, big, big thing, and I was very, very involved with Sing, and that's what I needed to be able to. I just had to plow through, because I didn't have a God consciousness really at the time.
Right.
And so I just had to really rely on self. And so that carried me through high school, and I was able to find space there. No religion, really. I mean, we just weren't this is whenever I talk about this, I reflect back on this. I remember 2 God instances. One where I asked my mother, I was in the car, I don't know if she remembers this. I remember asking her if God wears a beanie, a yarmulke. And then I remember when I was 8, she had a mole on her back and it needed to be removed. And the doctor scared her and said it was cancer. It was a very, very scary time. And she said, if God gets me through this operation, I will never smoke again. And she never picked up a cigarette again.
Wow.
And maybe one other instance where it was like, put on your seatbelt, otherwise God's going to strike you down type of thing. So that was my relationship with God. It was not very, and there's no fault to my family.
Right.
It's kind of, when I teach now and I talk about the Masorah, the literally mother to child, father to child, passed down Torah that since Har Sinai, that there are families where there is no broken link in that chain.
Right.
And in my family, there was a broken link. And we, like many families, many families. Yeah. So it was no fault to anybody. It was just, I think had my father not died, I do think there would have been a little more, because like my aunt, who was going to play a big big part of my story. They, my aunt and uncle, we would visit them in California. They belonged to a synagogue. They were, conservative and involved in chabarot and things like that. So I do think that we probably would have had a little bit more, but I'm speculating. I really don't know.
Right. Okay,
So yeah.
amazing. All right, well, Chaya, it's a great place to stop you. We're out of time for this segment, but we're going to take a small break. And when we come back, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, Chaya Parkov. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with Love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with Love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the second segment of Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I am speaking with Chaya Parkov, social worker, life coach, speaker, educator, marathoner, and kidney donor. Chaya has been sharing with us her inspirational journey to Torah, and before the break, she was telling us about her small exposures to God while she was in high school. So Chaya, why don't you continue from there?
Sure, Penina. So after high school, I went to college, and I went to a state school in New York for a year and a half. Lots of Jewish kids, lots and lots of Jewish kids, but not a whole lot of God or religion of any kind. I don't remember seeing any Kiruv organizations, except I do remember seeing I think it was the Crusades for Christ. Those were the Kiruv people that I saw on campus. And I was there for a year and a half. This is where my eating disorder really, really, really took off. There was a lot of pressure to be thin. I was very, trying very hard to always stay thin. And as a young teenager, I really got swept up in an eating disorder and was bulimic and dieting, binging, purging, that whole thing. I should tell you that I went to school very early. I actually started kindergarten early. My birthday is in March. And somehow I made the year, that September prior to the March, they somehow let me in. So I was always a year ahead. And then they had at the time this crazy special program for, I guess, smarter kids or whatever in public school in New York. And that was called the SP, special program. And you skipped 8th grade. Wow. Which I would never, ever, ever do. And I know my parents regretted it because that's such a pivotal year of just emotional.
I was going to say it is, but it's also like the most torturous year. Oh, maybe 7th grade is not torturous, but I would have liked to skip both. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to have just skipped all of it because it was not really easy for me at all, just on so many levels. But anyway, so I skipped the year. So I actually went to college at 16. So I was really young, in the depths of an eating disorder, and really just didn't know, it was very, very difficult. And that really was the beginning of, really struggling. And there were a lot of kids struggling with it. So I think in my suite that I was living with a bunch of girls, like 3 of them were bulimic. It was just really crazy. I ended up switching in the middle of my second year to a very, very small private school on the West Coast in Oregon, of all places. Wow. I was one of 2 Jews, and I went to a college counselor, and he recommended this place. And I guess he knew what he was doing, because that really is what led me eventually to a recovery from my eating disorder, and thank God, back to really Judaism. So I was there. I was one of two Jews. There was one Jewish professor. It was a very, very small school. And I got my first real bite of anti-Semitism there when a girl that I was friends with was talking about getting an apartment and said she Jewed him down in the rent. And I never really had heard anything like that before. People did look at me, where were my horns? Like, it really was interesting. They just had never met a Jew before. I did seek out, interestingly enough, I went to the JCC and I sought out, and I actually met a family, Harvey and Marlene Barron, who I actually recently found their son on Facebook.
I love Facebook.
And they're still, thank God, alive. And I want to thank them because I actually lived with them for a period of time when I was in between apartments. So I went to school there. I got a degree in communications, but I didn't even know how to work a VCR or, anything. I really was in the depths of my eating disorder during that time.
Does having an eating disorder, does that affect your ability to concentrate? I mean, I would think that the lack of nutrition would make it very hard to do college work.
That's a really interesting point, Panina. I never really thought of it that way, but actually it definitely does there, because we know that now we know the mind and the body are so connected, right? We didn't back then. There wasn't that level of science and that we are uncovering. I always say we're not discovering, we're uncovering God's world, and what he placed into the world when he created it. As science, we discover, but we're not inventing, we're uncovering. So, I do know that just from a mental health professional, I can tell you that yes, when your sodium changes your everything gets messed up with binging, purging, whether you're under eating or what have you. But I think it was more the obsession. It took a lot of energy to maintain. I also put a lot of energy in trying to stay thin. The summer after that first half year that I was in Oregon, I literally spent the summer at a gym in New York. That was all I did. I went on a diet. I lived at the gym. I don't even recall if I was binging and purging at that time. I was just exercising like crazy, which is a form of bulimia. I went back to school very, very thin. I was a stick. And I'll tell you, Panina, I might have looked great on the outside, but you could have just blown a little go like that, and I would have fallen over. I was a shell. I was so empty on the inside. I was so alone on the inside. I was so scared on the inside. But that, thank God, because that was the beginning of the end and the beginning of my beginning. I went back to school. I could not maintain the level of exercise that I did that summer when I went back to school. I tried and tried and tried. I tried having the nurse, the school nurse weigh me. I tried staying on the food plan. It was just terrible. I ended up really just getting thrown right back into, I was gaining weight and binging and purging and trying to lose and what have you. And I took myself I'd gone to a doctor's visit just for a well visit. And I mentioned that I was bulimic. I would say it like it was just, common information. Yeah. Like I have brown eyes. Yeah. And I have bulimia, And this woman gave me the name of a therapist and said, hey, if you ever want to talk to someone. And I actually finally did I was a resident director in my building at school. And I went to my, the head RA, and I said, I need help. And this was in Portland, Oregon. I went to this therapist, and it was very interesting. I mean, there's so much. We could probably talk 3 podcasts worth, worth just of the little things that may be interesting. But suffice to say, this therapist, without really realizing it, because she was not actually very fond of all 12-step programs, she did lead me to a 12-step program. And that eventually led me to Overeaters Anonymous and the 12-step community, which is all based on Torah. The 12 steps are really for the masses, this understanding that really we are, I had to admit I was really powerless over this situation. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't like going to meetings because they talked about God. I was like, it's creepy, because when I was growing up, the people that talked about God were the Christians. They were the ones that had God on their wall, We didn't talk about God. Like, it was very weird for me. But I did see that the people that were no longer struggling with, and engaging in their behavior talked about a relationship with God. And so I would sit in my little Chevy Chevette and I would talk out loud to whatever was out there, and that was back before cell phones, when if you were talking in your car and nobody was in the car, people just assumed you were on the phone on a Bluetooth. Then they assumed you were a little crazy.
Yeah.
But a girl took me, a not Jewish girl, took me to the ocean. I was in Oregon, took me to the Pacific Ocean, beautiful. And she said, go ahead and stop a wave. And I said, what are you talking about? I can't stop a wave. She said, exactly. There's a power greater than you. And that was the beginning of my relationship with God.
Wow.
Was this really realizing that there had to be something bigger than me. And as I gained recovery through the 12 steps, I eventually moved down to Los Angeles, moved in with my aunt and uncle, and I learned to meditate. And someone said, if you like meditating, you'll love Shabbos.
Okay.
And that's how it kind of segued into Judaism. There were a few, again, when I went to LA, I just got involved in the 12-step community there. Lots of Jews, but nobody observant. And, there were a couple of things that happened. This the it was a little anti-Torah, right? Because they gave you a mantra. I remember the finding out that that's not such a good idea to have a mantra. We have a mantra. It's Shema Yisrael, right? We have a mantra. Eino Milvado. We have a mantra. We don't need, words based on, idol worship. But it did start to put me in touch with God. And I remember being in a women's meeting in Beverly Hills on a Friday afternoon. I went to a lot of AA meetings too, because that's where the real foundation was. And I couldn't drink with my recovery for my eating disorder anyway. Sugar and alcohol break down the same way. And so, I was eating a much more clean diet. And I remember this lady, Millie, who was Jewish. She was not an observant Jewish woman, just Jewish woman. I remember her saying, we were talking about step 2, which is coming to believe in a power greater than yourself. And she said, my God is loving and forgiving. And I remember the first time I heard the 13 attributes of Hashem, and that loving and forgiving was really inherent, part of those 13. And so those experiences started kind of in, getting me a little bit exposed, but it was really in California. I had some experiences and through the 12-step program, through just being in an area where there were a lot of Jews, not necessarily observant, but we did get exposed to some, what my husband and I met my husband then, would call normal Orthodox people.
Amazing. Unfortunately, Chaya, I have to stop you right now because we are out of time for this segment, but I can't wait to hear where this goes from there. And I always love a good, how I met my husband story. So when we come back from our break, we'll continue our fascinating conversation with my very special guest, Chaya Parkov. You're listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
Hi, and welcome back to the last segment of today's Leap of Faith. I'm your host, Penina Taylor, and today I am speaking with Chaya Parkov, social worker, life coach, speaker, educator, marathoner, and kidney donor. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But Chaya has been sharing with us her inspirational journey to Torah, and before the break, she was telling us about how she was in California and began to be exposed to modern Orthodox Jews, and she somehow met her husband. So Chaya, why did you tell us about that?
Sure. Thanks, Penina. Yeah, I was living in Los Angeles, and I was actually working at Sinai Temple in the office while I was going to school. I was going to school for back to college to get my degree in education. And I was told that there was this thing happening at the Hillel House in, what was it called then? I'm trying to think what it was called, the Bayit on UCLA. There was a guy in school for rabbinical school at the University of Judaism, which I think is now called American Jewish University or something. It was the JTS on the West Coast at the time.
JTS is
Jewish Theological Seminary. So that's the conservative.
Oh, it's conservative.
Conservative, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And so this guy was in school for it, and he had invited me, I guess, kind of out on a date to go on a date with him on a Friday night. And lo and behold, he walked over to my aunt and uncle's house. We lived in Westwood, and we walked together over to the UCLA Bayit, which was a co-ed kind of house for Jews. It was kind of connected with Hillel, and there's a whole anyone that knows about the Bayit, there's like lots of stories about the Bayit. And so I went to that. And this guy was Shomer Shabbos. Most of the kids weren't there, but I remember going into his room and it was very dark. There were a bunch of kids sitting in there, but it was dark. There was one light on. Funny. But there was a speaker, and there were all of these Jewish kids that were my contemporaries, and they were post-college. Some were in college, some were in post-college, like master's programs or out of college already. And I remember one guy came up to me and said, "Are you Orthodox?" And I said, "No." And he turned around, and many, many years later, actually, he and his wife and me and my husband had a Shabbos meal around the table of my aunt's house, ironically.
Oh, very cool.
So, yeah. So I never went out with that guy again, but I did find this community of Jewish kids, and so I started to get involved in that. And so the second or third, I did my own form of shidduch dating. I said, I'm going to go out with anybody who's remotely normal, Jewish and remotely normal, a male Jewish remotely normal guy. So I did. Some of them were very remotely normal. But at one of those events, I met my husband, who was from New Jersey, but was in the Air Force on the West Coast. So you had a girl from Brooklyn and a guy from New Jersey. We had to meet in California, to get married. I met him. He grew up conservative. His father grew up modern Orthodox, and so they grew up conservative. They kept a conservative kosher home. They were involved in a synagogue. He was involved in a synagogue growing up. His father could look at a tikkun, which is the Torah with all the all the vowels and everything, and then go read straight out of the Torah. He comes from that background, and we met, and he asked me out, and we started dating. And when I went out with him several months later, we actually came back to New Jersey for the Jewish holidays. He brought me home, and my family understood that I went to his house because they went to synagogue. I didn't go to, our family didn't go to synagogue, only for Yizkor. Right. In the basement. So it was interesting because I was so blown away. Interesting, at that high holidays, the rabbi of his synagogue said at the sermon, I'm basically quoting him, I'm going to speak about a topic that I normally don't speak about. I'm going to speak about a topic that might make some of you feel uncomfortable. I'm going to speak about God. And I thought that was really interesting because I already was into God, right? Because of my 12-step background. I was into God. And so I thought that was very interesting. And then we went back to Los Angeles, and we started getting exposed to people who were observant. We actually took a course at the University of Judaism called Making Marriage Work.
Okay.
And it was several couples that were either already married in the first 6 months, or they were engaged or thinking about getting married. And it was very good in a lot of ways. And so there were interesting couples that were in the group. There was one couple that were, they quoted themselves modern Orthodox. And there was another couple who actually got divorced. She was not really so observant, and he had become observant. And so they were getting married. Anyway, my husband and I became engaged during that course.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guy of the modern Orthodox couple said, if you meditate, you'll love Shabbos. That's what he said to me. And they invited us for a Shabbos, and it was very strange. Although both of us had experience, we both have relatives who were Orthodox, but we started, and we met a couple at their Shabbos table who we really hit it off with. And they told us about a synagogue in our neighborhood where we were both were living. And so we started going to the Westwood Kehillah, and my husband really loved it. And I would go to an OA meeting on Saturday morning, and he'd go to shul, and then I'd meet him over there. And then we just started getting exposed to what we called like normal Orthodox people, young people, and their values just seemed like what I wanted, and it spoke to me. What happened was my husband was in the Air Force, and we got moved to a small place in Texas for 7 months, which turned out to be about a year or so, that he was going to train, and then we were going to be sent somewhere in the world. After 7 months, we were going to be sent somewhere in the world. It was 3 hours west of San Antonio.
Okay.
My husband had no time off. He was in school from 6 in the morning until 5 at night, Monday through Friday, except for 2 weeks in December. We went right around December 1st. And so a few weeks later, he had off for 2 weeks. And so we went to San Antonio, and we went out on Friday night. And then on Saturday morning, we said, let's go somewhere to shul. There's Reform, Orthodox, and Conservative Chabad. Where should we go? We said, let's go to the Orthodox because we know we'll get lunch. And we didn't just get lunch. We got introduced to Rabbi Aryeh Sheinberg and his wife Judy. And they said to us, you are welcome to come to our home anytime. And I'm not telling you to drive on Shabbos, but you are welcome here whenever.
Wow.
And we came the following week because he had off. So we were able to get there on time. And that's when they told us you can come whenever. We spent Shabbos with them. I pranced around in tank tops and shorts. I had no clue how to dress, no clue.
But they
I
were
was
warm and
really
welcoming
taken.
anyway, huh?
Oh, they were so warm and welcoming. So warm.
That's the
We're
key,
still,
isn't it?
connected them. Yep. And
That's
she would
the
say,
key.
so probably 4 out of 5 Shabboses a month we would go. This was the winter. We would get there 3 hours after Shabbos started because we couldn't leave the base until 5.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 3-hour drive. And we would get there, and she would say, I lit these candles with you in mind.
Aw.
And actually, when a few years ago, I think when I got asked to teach for the Jewish Experience, when I moved to Denver, this is fast forwarding 25 years. When we moved to Denver, the Jewish Experience here asked me to teach for them, to be the women's educator, which was like, wow, and lead trips to Israel. I called Judy and I said, you lit your candles with me in mind, and look at my life today.
Right.
We have 5 children, all who are, thank God, somewhere on the path of Torah and in different ways. And we have a loving home where my husband and I we definitely are not, I always say we're in the same book. We're not on the same page. I tell people with marriages, you don't have to be on the same page.
Right.
You just need to be in the same book. You need to be in the same book.
Right.
So, we definitely developed different ways. We went to Israel for a year, but after that San Antonio experience, we would go there a lot. After we were in Texas, we were actually supposed to we were assigned to Japan.
Wow.
This was in 1992. We were assigned to go to Japan for 3 years, but that was right after the Gulf War ended.
Yes.
And they laid off 4,000 captains.
Wow.
And my husband got laid off from the Air Force. Have you ever heard of that one?
Well.
And I was teaching, and we didn't know. I went back to California to teach. He was in Texas still taking this course, and we didn't know what we were going to do. And one Motzei Shabbos, he was in San Antonio. The Rebbitzin, Judy, said to my husband, you know what I really regret? That I didn't go to Israel before I had my kid. And my husband called me that night, and he said, what about if we go to Israel? He had a little severance pay, and we went to Israel, and we went for 3 months and stayed for 10.
Wow.
And we started learning. First we went to an ulpan, and we went to like yeshivas in the afternoon. But I went to a few different places in the afternoon. But at one point I said, I don't want to learn just in the afternoon. I want to learn all day. I don't want to do this ulpan. Which I regret a little bit because I really could have used to really get good Hebrew. But I wanted Torah. I was thirsty for Torah. So my husband went to Or Sameach, and I went to a few, and I ended up in Neve. And, that was, we learned a lot. We became Shomer Shabbos there. The first school I went to, they said, we don't, all we ask you that you do is you keep kosher and Shabbos. And I was like, keep Shabbos? What does that really mean? I called a friend who I'm still friends with today, who I met at an OA meeting when I got to Israel, Susie Berenbaum, and I said, can I borrow your hot plate? And that was our beginning of Shabbos, was plugging in a hot plate. I had no idea that you're really not supposed to cook on the hot plate, but we would, we just started. But by the time we came back from Israel, I came in tank top and shorts and left in
modest clothing,
a wig, and the whole thing.
Amazing. Well, unfortunately, Chaya, we are out of time for today's program. Man, we could talk for another hour or two. I would just like to ask you, if somebody was listening and heard something that you said that intrigued them, or they'd like to be in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you?
I welcome, there's so much more to the story.
Right.
And so, you could definitely reach out to me. Easiest way is probably email.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Chaya, CHAYA, at firstclassaging.com.
Okay,
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your incredibly inspiring story, Chaya. Really, I really appreciate your joining me today. And you've been listening to Leap of Faith. I'm Penina Taylor, and I'd love to hear from you as well. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can email me at penina@israelnewstalkradio.com. That's PENINA@israelnewstalkradio.com. Thanks again for being here with me today, and I'll see you next time when we take a leap of faith together here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.